Thanks for being here. Today, again, we're releasing our popular annual financial report. This is a sort of a financial snapshot of Pittsburgh, and it's something that we started doing a few years ago in our attempt to be more transparent in city finances, to make city finances more accessible, and really to engage the citizenry in the issues of Pittsburgh finances. We have been fortunate in each year that we produced this, and again this year, well, it's last year, of getting the award for outstanding achievement in popular financial reporting from the GFOA, the Government Finance Officers Association of America, and so we're certainly happy to be able to have that kind of recognition for this effort. This is a best practice for cities to have this kind of information available, and basically what it is taking the annual financial reports and breaking them down in layman's terms so that people can see where we are annually. And we went over some of this when we released the CAFR, but again, 2016 was a very good year financially for the city of Pittsburgh. We generated a very large surplus, $37 million. We brought in $37 million more in revenue than we spent last year, which is obviously a very good news for the city, because the city has continued to use surplus dollars to supplement its capital spending program, and I think that everyone knows that we're struggling on capital spending. Couple of highlights that I think, if you look through this report, that jump out at you from last year is, if you look at the spending side of the equation, when you think of the city, and that number jumps out at you, right? 54% of our budget goes to public safety. That's our uniformed services, police, fire, EMS. That's a large chunk of our spending, and especially when you consider that what's not included in that number are the pension numbers, which are the contributions to pension. So if you figured that in, you would figure about 60% of our spending goes right to public safety. And again, we are a city that continues to lose population. Yet we know we need to provide public safety services for a much larger city than we are, because people still come here to work, to go to school, to go to the hospital, to participate in our cultural and recreational activities. So every day we are providing services for a much larger city than our population currently represents. The other thing I would go to is page 11. Because this is one area where we do talk a little bit about capital spending, and to see where that capital money goes, and spending $53 million last year in capital projects, which is an increase over the time since the time I've been here. That's probably the biggest capital budget that we had. I think one year we had a higher budget than that, but $53 million doesn't get you very far. Right? I mean, if you're spending $13 million in paving and $13 million on the Greenfield Bridge, well, that's half your budget gone right there. And I think as you drive around this city, you know that we have significant challenges in capital spending. So, being in a position where we're generating surplus dollars, that enables us to increase the amount of capital spending we can do. And in fact, this year, in 2017, we moved $12 million from surplus into capital projects. So it's we're inching that up and able to spend more on capital spending. Then the last thing I would just highlight is on page 13, is debt. This is an amazing story, I think, for the city of Pittsburgh. When I started in this office almost 10 years ago, we were almost at $1 billion in debt. We finished last year, you can't really read this number, but 426 million. $426 million in debt as of the end of 2016. I mean, that is a significant pay down of debt. And we talk a lot about the debt cliff that's going to happen in the next couple of years. Well, you can already see what's going on from being close to $1 billion in spending 10 years ago, or $1 billion in debt 10 years ago to being down to 400 million, and probably by the end of this year below 400 million, is a very good story. I mean, a difficult story for us, because it is what has forced us to in a position of not being able to spend the way we would like to spend in capital and infrastructure. So again, this is a story that continues to be a good one for the city, that we've been able to pay down that debt. And when you are in a given year spending, we have a budget of over $500 million, but when 90 million of that is going to pay down debt, and another 70 million is going to pension, it really does. And then, and you've got to pay more than half of your remaining budget toward public safety. It really does leave very little room to do some of the basic things that make this city the most livable city that it is. So that's just a quick look at the PAFR. Again, the main goal of this is to get it out to the community, get people talking about city finances, get them engaged in the issue of city finances. We find a lot of times that the best ideas come from our citizens, and so we're trying to be in communication as much as we can. This is obviously online on our website. We do produce hard copies that we send out to the libraries, to the community organizations, and they're happy to get it. Now, every year we get notes from people thanking us for the report, and this year actually we had some people asking us, where is it? So it's been a very good report for us, and we're glad to release it, and certainly appreciate the work of the accounting staff and the rest of the office who helped put this together. Let me just talk a little bit about 2017, because we're now at mid-year, and I did see some numbers this morning that are reflective of where we are at a halfway point in the year. The June numbers aren't completely finalized yet, but it gives you a pretty good indication of where we are. And again, we are on a pretty positive track in 2017. First off, tax revenues are not only are running at or better than budget, and running better than last year. And as we just said, last year was a very good year. We're right now running ahead of 2016 in most taxed categories. We are down slightly on permits, and both on the building side, and when you look at parks and shelter permits. I don't want to read too much into that right now, because some of that may be reporting delays and other things, but for right now, we are running behind where we were last year, which could be a harbinger of some slowing economic activity in the city. But we'll have to wait and see on that. For right now, we're not seeing that in wage tax or in other areas. Charges for services are up slightly last year. We're actually seem to be doing much better collecting for our ambulance service. The EMS collections there's been an improvement since last year. And then our intergovernmental revenues are up, but that's mostly because we are now receiving the casino money in a more timely and regular basis. But if you look at it based on where we were last year, we're running $12 million ahead of where we were last year overall. And that's a good story, and certainly will be helpful to us. On the spending side, we are basically running at budget. So we are at budget on spending. We are ahead of budget on revenues, which again would suggest a surplus, and a significant surplus, hopefully, for 2017. It's hard to know what's going to happen in the second half of the year. But just looking at it, we know that we start the year, we build a surplus into the budget. So we build about $4 million in surplus into the budget. We're doing better than that. So, if the first half of the year is indicative of the second half of the year, you're looking at a surplus, could be as high as $20 million. Again, depending on what happens for the rest of the year. And again, not as healthy as last year's surplus, but still a very positive number. Again, hopefully puts us in a position of being able to do more on the capital side and to focus on capital projects. The city still has the challenge that it's always had. Okay, for the last 50 years, our city is reliant on the people who live here and the number of people who live here continues to shrink. Despite what you read in a lot of the stories about a lot of people moving into the city, the net effect has been that people continue to leave. And that's not a good story. And that's something that we have to address. Again, we still have to provide these services for the people who come to work and to enjoy the city, or to go to the doctor, or to come to college here. We have to provide services of a much larger city. And it gets tougher and tougher when that tax base, that main tax base, which are the people who live here, continue to shrink. That's the struggle that we have. We've got to find a way to reverse that. I know that the population drop has slowed, but it still hasn't reversed. And that's the challenge. That's the biggest challenge that we face. So I'll take questions if you have them.
Michael, what's it mean? Okay, so they're 12 million ahead on revenues. What's that tell you?
Well, what it tells you, it tells you a couple of things. First off, if you look at, it depends on the category of tax you're looking at. Okay, so, but generally all of them are running ahead. Probably the one that I think is most indicative of what's going on in the city is the wage tax. Okay, the earned income tax is a tax on the wages of people who live in the city of Pittsburgh. And that number continues to grow, and it's grown every year for the last 7 or 8 years, or if not longer. Part of that is a collection issue because, back about 5 years ago, we instituted Act 32, which required greater withholding requirements for employers and privatized to some degree that collection system. And so there was a bump there. But even beyond that, we've seen increases every year, which says to me that that wages are going up in the city of Pittsburgh, and I think that bears out when you see statistics that show average incomes or median incomes have grown in the city. So there's increase overall. That doesn't mean that everyone's getting a raise. What I do think it does is that the city is attracting a lot of higher skilled and higher wage jobs. So we're seeing that benefit. Even if the net number of jobs hasn't grown, the wage quality of those jobs has grown. So while it doesn't appear that there are more jobs in the city of Pittsburgh, it does show that they are higher skilled jobs and higher paying jobs that are coming to the city of Pittsburgh. And that has good and bad effects, right? So we still are leaving a lot of unskilled workers behind in our economy locally. I think that's plain to see. But we are, as a whole, it is moving the numbers on revenues higher. That's a good thing. The reason I say that we're not creating jobs is when you look at the local services tax, which is the $52 tax, which is a tax on all jobs in the city. That number has remained stagnant since I've been here. So, maybe industries are changing, and maybe some industries are adding jobs and others we're losing jobs. But the net effect has been basically a stable number. So we're not seeing significant job growth in the city. It just seems to be a reshuffling of the kinds of jobs that are here. Yes.
I've heard from some folks at the URA that they're a little bit worried that the president's upcoming budget might mean that some federal funding that they get might be going away. Would there be room in this budget for you to increase the URA subsidy next year in the year?
But that's probably a better question for council and the mayor than for me. But clearly, when you are generating surplus dollars, then there are dollars available. The question is, what are the priorities? And where do those dollars go? There's a plan on the table to create a $10 million subsidy for a land bank. Now, the idea that's been floated is increasing the realty transfer tax. I think that's a non-starter. I think that's got to be about the worst idea that's come around in a long time. But somehow on the fifth floor, that idea seems to make sense. That's a strange situation when you're generating a $37 million surplus and likely to have another sizable surplus, that you're actually talking about raising taxes in Pittsburgh right now is just ludicrous. If anything that this story tells you, when you see these kind of surplus dollars is, and you see that population leaving, and one of the reasons they're leaving is because it's expensive to live here. And so we should be thinking about that. At some point, we've got to take a hard look at our tax structure and whether or not we should be talking about cutting taxes. Now, we are right now, as you know, in Act 47. We're a distressed community under state law, but that's going to end next year. And at that point, if anything, discussion that should be on the table is what tax to cut, not which ones to increase. So, but that being said, yeah, there is room there, if that's determined to be the priority on the policy side of this discussion by council and the mayor. There is some room there, but I would join in the same concern. I do think that when you read remarks coming out of Washington about urban policy in general, that there will be less dollars around to do some of the things that some of these agencies do. The city budget itself is not heavily reliant on federal funding, but certainly the authorities are. And granted, there's some federal money in here, but it's not so much that it would be a real hindrance to us. The bigger issue for us is, state funding, but most of our revenue is locally generated. No.
On a long-term debt, that's a pretty significant chunk that it's been reduced. What's it looking like going forward and getting out of Act 47?
Right. So what everything seems to coincide in 2 years from now. So in 2019, where we're now paying $90 million in debt service, by 2019 that number drops to $30 million. So that's, again, you talk about room. That's $60 million of room in the budget to do something. So that's where there's going to be some real discussion about what priorities are and should be. That's a big number. Some of it has already been carved out, because we know in 19 the other thing that happens is the amount of the parking revenue that goes to the pension doubles. So we're putting 13 million in today. In 19 we put in 26 million. So some of that money has already been carved out, but still there's a significant amount of money there that will be available for discussions about taxes and for discussions about spending. So we're going to have to see how that works out.
What year is that?
So 2019 is the year. Actually in 2018 it drops a little bit.
Parking tax subsidy bill doubled.
Well, that's a good question. I think there's some dispute as to whether that happens next year or in 19, but it's one of the next 2 years. Yeah, it really. I think it actually goes into effect in 18. So next year could be a tougher year budget-wise than 19, because we'll still have even though the payment drops, debt service payment next year I believe goes from around 90 million to around 60 million, and then it drops to 30, and then it's 30 moving forward. So that's going to put us in the position to have a real capital program, okay? And understand why it's important, okay? Capital program is mostly funded by borrowing money. And you want to borrow money on capital projects because, okay, we're doing the Greenfield Bridge right now, $13 million. We're paying it almost all exclusively with current year dollars. That's a 50-year asset. So the taxpayers today are paying all of it. When you do a real capital program, that the cost is spread out to all the taxpayers. The ones 50 years from now pay some of that too. So that's why it's just a better way to fund some of these multi-year projects, and we're finally in a position to getting back to that where we're actually spending capital projects across years rather than with current year dollars. Yes.
Is your office keeping data on the revenue generated from blighted properties coming back on the tax rolls?
We don't have specific data on that. The Treasurer's Office would probably have that more than us because they're really watching we kind of watch the expenditure side of this equation. So I would think that Treasury, Finance Department would probably have more of that, and they would have more update information than we would have because we're looking back and they're more current. Yeah.
How are we doing on pension funds?
So the pension fund is in a much stronger position than it was 10 years ago. It's still a long way to go. And it's one of those things that's going to take time. But the good news about the pension fund is that the money that is held in trust for the pension continues to grow. So in each of the years that we've, over the last few years, because we're putting more money in, and because the market has helped, we've seen that fund grow from around $300 million up to over $400 million, and we're putting more money in on an annual basis. We're working our way to the point where we're going to be putting as much in on an annual basis as goes out every year. So that would allow that portfolio then just to continue to grow with the market. Now, it doesn't mean the market goes up every year, but over time it does, right? So, or it has. So, I would say this, that for the first time, we right now have a plan that is effectively dealing with the pension. It's going to take a long time to get to the point where we're funded to a comfortable level, but for a long time while I've been here, we didn't even have a plan. And now we have parking money dedicated to the fund. We have, where the mayor and council are committed to funding the pension at a higher rate, and in each year we're seeing the benefits of that. So again, a lot of it depends on the economy and the market, but it's a long-term problem. But we finally have a long-term solution.
What's our percentage?
Their funding percentage right now is if you look at with the parking asset, it's actually probably a little higher than our last meeting, but it's around 60%. Thank you very much.